Hello, first grade. This is a story for Friday, June 5. Sweetness from the flowers, a candle from the bees, for our hearts a story, light and peace. Once upon a time, in a beautiful garden with the most beautiful flowers and plants and trees, there was a gate, and overhead there were flowers on vines. And in order to get into the garden, you had to walk under the beautiful purple flowers above on a beautiful dirt pathway. The dirt pathway had grass on either side and wound around garden beds. The garden beds had smooth rocks all around the edges. And in the garden beds grew pumpkin and zucchini, spaghetti squash, butternut squash, all kinds of squash, in another garden bed across the pathway. There grew flowers, blue and red flowers, green and purple, orange and yellow, like a rainbow on the ground, and butterflies everywhere, flapping and fluttering and flying to different flowers. The hum of bees could be heard as they gathered pollen. And up above, in the treetops and in the branches hiding, whistled birds, different beautiful songs like angels from the heavens. The trees provided beautiful cooling shade all around the garden. The pathway wound around each garden bed and came to different trees. Beautiful shady spots, like little private nooks under each tree. One tree had a swing hanging down. Another had bushes around it. You could hide in the bushes and even have a little fort inside. This was the garden. Everyone loved the garden, even little bunnies hopping around, chipmunks and squirrels, and at night, raccoons and possums came to visit the garden. But mostly we were awake in the garden during the day. The beautiful sunshine filtering through the green leaves of the trees, dappling the floor of the grassy garden. And if you looked closely at the flowers and their leaves, you could see little inchworms inching along bit by bit. And ladybugs flying from one leaf to another and across the pathway to another garden bed. So much was buzzing and humming and twittering and happening in the gardens. The garden had a gardener who dearly loved all of her flowers and all of her vegetables and the trees that provided the shade. The gardener would slowly walk from flower to flower, caressing it, coaxing it to grow even more beautifully, and going to the vegetables and helping them so they wouldn't sink too deeply into the dirt. She moved a pumpkin this way or that. She tended a zucchini that was getting caught up in the twine and the vine. This was what the gardener loved to do. The gardener loved gardening. One day, the gardener came to the garden and stopped after the gardener got through the gate. The gardener looked around at the beautiful vegetables, the beautiful flowers. They were growing so well, so fast. They looked so much bigger than when the gardener had started tending them, and so much fuller. Yet, the gardener was saddened a little, for it was time for the gardener to tend another garden that was calling her name. Another garden that was willed for her to go to. But it was still hard to leave this garden. So much work and love was poured into it from the gardener's heart. But then the twittering of a bird was heard overhead, and the gardener looked up, and the bird flew down, twitter, twitter, twittering onto the ground nearby, and hopped up onto a smooth rock, the border of one of the garden beds. Twitter, 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 chirp, 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 said the bird. And then the bird flew across the path to the other garden bed. Twitter, 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 chirp, 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 and up she jumped and flew back up into the trees, singing gaily. Oh, that's right, thought the gardener. The birdie reminded me. There's another gardener who's coming who will take care of this beautiful garden. There's always something wonderful around the corner. And the gardener breathed a sigh of relief. The flowers wouldn't be left alone. The vegetables wouldn't be left to get tangled up in or dirty or be forgotten to be turned. Those pumpkins needed help turning so they wouldn't get soggy on the ground. So the gardener rejoiced in her heart, knowing that a new gardener would be coming soon to help the flowers and the vegetables, someone to come and sit under the trees and enjoy them, just like she had enjoyed them. So the gardener would be coming soon. She wasn't sure when, but she knew in her heart that the gardener would come soon. So she took out her favorite gardening gloves and set them on the rock, one of the smooth stones. And then she put a trowel and a digger next to them. She patted them, looked up over at the garden bed with the vegetables, and smiled. And she looked over at the other garden bed with the beautiful colors of the rainbow and the flowers, the butterflies fluttering around and the bees humming to and fro, and the birds twittering overhead. Then the gardener stood up and walked around the garden one more time to say goodbye and not to forget all her favorite places. But she knew she'd be back to visit with the other gardener there, and oh, the stories they would tell each other about the garden. She would share how the garden started. Oh, how little and teensy and tiny were the little flowers when they started, and the vegetables, they didn't have any vegetables yet on their vines. The other gardener would love those stories. It would warm that gardener's heart just as it had warmed hers. And then out the garden gate she went, while the bird twittered overhead gaily. Stars, moon, sun, now our story is done. May it rest in our hearts, and the light now shine from